Good stuff. So yeah, welcome to my talk on resilience. I always feel that I should start by justifying myself what allows me to talk about this sort of area. So by way of introductions, as kind of mentioned, my background for the first half of my career, I mainly worked in sport with footballers to use psychological research to see if we can improve performance. Outside of football, have been lucky enough to be part of the support team for athletes for Team GB for the last two Olympic and Paralympic Games. And where I really came to be with this sort of area was in the build-up to the London Olympics. I remember having some discussions around what was going to be our competitive advantage. So what could we do differently compared to our rivals that was going to help us win more medals? And at the time, I incorrectly thought it was going to be around performance under pressure. So can we execute our ability and knowledge and skills in one-off situations, which is not a million miles away from what we want students to do in their exams. And yet we did something different for the Rio Games. And for the Rio Games, we spoke to our coaches and we said, over a 4-year period, which of our athletes do you think are going to make the most improvements and what do they have in common? And the feedback that we kept getting time and time again was over a prolonged period of time, the best competitive advantage that anyone has is their ability to learn. And if you can learn quicker, more efficiently and more effectively, you have an edge over your rivals. And within that, how do we help develop the resilience and motivation within people to want to do that learning? And so my job as the psychologist in the team was to look up all the research on the science of learning. And so that led to us over the last 2 years pretty much doing everything we know, reading every journal about how students actually learn. And so what I'd like to do today is take a few of the studies that we found when we were researching our book and highlight them and suggest some of the implications they have for especially student resilience. So to start with, what I thought I'd do is, as a psychologist running CPD and training workshops, I don't get to do experiments in the research labs. So what I basically do now is I shoehorn experiments into my talks. So I thought I'd start with my first experiment. So if you have a pen and paper, now would probably be a good time to take it out. My first experiment is called the anagram experiment. The way it works is I'm going to give you 60 seconds to solve 4 anagrams. This is an individual task. Don't share your answers with the person next to you because you are competing against them. The anagrams will come up every 10 or 15 seconds. So if you are struggling with one of them for whatever reason, don't waste the full minute on just one. Move on to the next one. So you have 4 anagrams over the course of a minute. They'll pop up every 10 or 15 seconds. If everyone is ready, your 60 seconds starts now. Okay, let's see how everyone did. These were the 4 anagrams. Did anyone get the first anagram? Okay, that's good, because the first one's actually an impossible anagram. One of the things you should know, you should never trust psychologists when they do experiments. The second one, yeah, also impossible, as indeed was the third. Anyone get the 4th anagram? Mindset, yeah. So what I find fascinating about this sort of experiment is this experiment shows us one of the common misconceptions that people have around motivation and resilience, and that is the concept of you're a motivated person or you're a resilient person doesn't really hold true for me because it can fluctuate so quickly. You can start this task really motivated, and then very quickly that motivation and resilience can drop. So what we typically see is for some people, they do the first one and they struggle with it, and their thought process is something along the lines of, I'm not very good at that anagram. And they get to the second one, and with that failure, they start to overgeneralise, and they go, well, maybe I'm just crap at anagrams in general. By the time you get to the third one, and you think everyone else is getting the answer right, people tend to think, am I the stupidest person in the room here because I'm the only one who's not getting the anagrams? And for some people, they get to that last one, and they disengage, and they don't try because they've had that repeated failure, and as such, they tend not to get it right. Whereas I'm pretty sure, if I show people 3 real anagrams to start with, nearly everyone gets that last one right. And this is because individual motivation levels vary so much and can change quickly. My favourite study, when we were researching our book that illustrated this, is affectionately known as the daffodil experiment. And the way the daffodil experiment works is once a year, across Ivy League universities in America, for a whole week, they have what's known as the daffodil drive. So the whole campus is just flooded with daffodils. They're really accessible, they're really cheap to buy, like they only cost $1, and all the money raised goes to their version of cancer research. So there's no reason not to buy one, because it's accessible, it's cheap, and it's for a moral good cause. And so what the researchers did in this study is they went to interview students a week before the daffodil drive, and they asked them, are you planning on buying any daffodils? And what they found is nearly every student said, yes, I'm going to buy a daffodil, and on average I'll probably buy at least 2. The researchers then went back a week later after the daffodil drive to interview the same students, and what they found in terms of their actual behaviour was quite different. Less than half the students bought a daffodil, and on average they only bought 1. And what I find fascinating about this study here is that top group there, they're not lying when they say they're going to buy 2 daffodils. They honestly have good intentions and they mean it. But what we know is converting good intentions into behaviour change is really, really difficult. This study alone for me explains why gyms make so much money in January. Because everyone signs up with good intentions, but that follow-through, that converting it is hard. And the same thing often happens with students, I think. They start a task, or we start a project at the start of the year with good intentions, but converting those intentions into behaviour is the ultimate challenge. And what we now know is, quite counterintuitively, individual motivation levels are a poor predictor of future behaviour. What's a better predictor of future behaviour is actually our environment that we're in. If we look at smoking as a fascinating example, all the motivational messaging around smoking had minimal impact, whereas once the environment was changed into you can't smoke in pubs and public spaces, then we see people's behaviour change. My favourite example of this happened a few years ago in Sweden. The challenge, the behaviour change they were seeking was, can we get people to be more physically active? So can we get them to take the stairs instead of taking the escalator? And they didn't do any of the motivational stuff. They didn't try and convince them of the benefits or the downsides of being sedentary. They just changed their environment. And that's what led to the behaviour change. Here is what they did. specifically to resilience and our students? What is the right sort of environment that facilitates this resilience. Fortunately, research can point us in the right direction. One of my favourite studies came out fairly recently. This is by two of the leading resilience researchers in the world, in my opinion. And as well as many other tips, one thing that really stood out for me was their concept of how do we develop a resilient environment. And they would suggest you need two main factors to consider. The first, they describe it as the level of challenge. Challenge being how high do we set the demand, how much do we believe people can improve, can get better, having high expectations and standards around behaviour, and believing that you can do more than you did previously. There being a constant driving force forward. And that combines with the level of support. Support includes feeling connected to the group, knowing who to turn to for emotional support or advice or technical support. And the great thing about this is it allows psychologists to do what we love to do the most, which is create a nice 2x2 matrix. And it's worth considering what is the environment you're creating either within your classroom or indeed across a whole school. If we're in the bottom left-hand box, if we create an environment that has low challenge and low support, not much tends to happen there. People tend to stagnate. The top left box of having a really high challenge and demanding environment but isn't very supportive, maybe short term I can eke out the last few drops of performance, but essentially long term, if I keep asking people to do more but give them less to do it with, it's not sustainable. We tend to see burnout, anxiety and stress happen here. The bottom right hand box, if we have low levels of demand but really supportive, in those sort of environments, it's not necessarily a bad environment. In fact, it's probably quite nice, it's quite comfortable, it's pleasant. But we do have to acknowledge that high performance doesn't really happen there. And they would suggest, through all their research, that the best way to help develop resilience is this combination of the two. It's having high levels of challenge and high levels of support. And I look back at my early practice, and one of the things I used to do is I used to hate awkward silences when I asked a question, and so as a result would always accept people's first answer, so I could just move on with the session. And essentially what I found was my environment was incredibly supportive, but all I was really doing was lowering the bar of my expectations of them, and so it was impossible for them to ever get in that top right-hand box of resilience, because I had to be the one setting the tone. And they suggest to develop resilience, we need this combination of the two. But that then begs the next question of, what does high challenge and high support meaningfully look like on a day-to-day basis on a practical level? Two other studies that I wanted to highlight before I finish that I think might give an indication. The first is known as the motivation study. What they did in this study is they looked to teach students a new foreign language. They chose Mandarin because none of the students knew it, so everyone was starting at base level. And they taught it to them in a really boring way, really monotone delivery, no fancy PowerPoint, because they wanted to replicate the complaint that demotivated students have, which is, I found the lesson boring. So the question is, how do I motivate students to do something that they find boring? And in this study, they chose 4 different conditions. The first condition didn't teach them why they were learning the new topic, they just taught it to them. The second one emphasised, you've got to really pay hard attention and work your best, because there's going to be a test at the end of the year. This test is really important. The third condition, we're told, because it's what's expected of you, because we've always done it that way, because you should, because that's what we do here, essentially. And the last one, we're told, we're teaching you this new topic because it's going to help you achieve your goals in the future. If I was to give you just 10 seconds with the person next to you, if you had to guess your gut feeling, which of these 4 conditions led to the most motivated students and which had the least impact? So if you could rate them from 1 to 4, from most motivated to least motivated, what's your gut feeling? I'll give you just 10 seconds to see if you think the same as the person next to you. Here's what the research found. Here were the results. And I have to say, the results, the first time I saw these results was actually quite counterintuitive to what I would have predicted. And it took a fair bit of the reading of the research to kind of get my head around it. So unsurprisingly, the least motivating condition, if we're going to teach a new topic in a boring way, unsurprisingly, is if we don't give a reason for it. I mean, why would anyone be motivated to work hard at something they don't like and they don't know why they're doing it? Quite surprisingly for me, the next one in terms of the least effective was actually because there's going to be a test. Essentially, going to be a test only motivates the people who who know they're going to do well on the test, and essentially having this external motivator in the future, it might be enough to start something, but it's not enough to maintain it if there's no internal motivation, if there's no enjoyment from it. Quite surprisingly for me, next on the list was because you should. And I think this is partly attributable to what's known as the bandwagon effect. Like if you see everyone else doing it and it's the way it's always been done, people tend to go with the flow. I don't think that works so well on a one-on-one coaching basis, but if you have the group numbers, that can carry through. But by far and away, the most effective way to motivate people on a new and boring task is if we can relate the task to their future goals. And in the research, this is known as creating a sense of purpose. If you know why you're doing what you're doing, and if you value the benefit of it, and you can see how it's going to help you achieve your own goals, as opposed to someone else's goals for you, that tends to lead to a condition where I think you are more motivated, and you're more likely to put yourself in challenging and seek out supportive environments. The second area that I just wanted to touch on was what's known as the cycling experiment. And this is, I think, a really fascinating way of how to motivate people. And this is the last study I kind of want to touch on today. In this study, they had students come into a lab and they put them on a fixed bike, the sort of bike you see in the gym. And they said, I want you to cycle for 4,000 metres as fast as you possibly can. So it's a race to exhaustion, maximum effort for 4,000 metres. And that's what the students did. They then gave them a few days break to rest and recover. And then for round 2, they got them back in the lab, put them in front of the same bike again, said same rules, 4,000 metres, and want you to do it as fast as you possibly can. But this time, the only thing we're going to change is we're going to let you race in front of a screen which has an avatar of your previous go. So all you need to do is keep up with your previous maximum efforts. As I mentioned earlier, you can never trust psychologists when they tell you anything in their experiments. And what the students didn't know is that this avatar of their previous go had actually been sped up by about 5% quicker. And what did they find? Nearly every student kept up with this new increased rate, because we know there's a link between effort and expectations. And the phrase that often gets used in psychology is that no one rises to low expectations. We have to set the bar high because we set the tone. In the research, this is known as the Pygmalion effect, which describes over 50 years of research, which shows that if teachers have high expectations for their students tend to perform better. The opposite of this is known as the Golem effect. And the Golem effect states if we have low expectations, people tend to perform worse. My final example of the Golem effect, I thought I'd finish on a video. This is the cost of low expectations, and this is why we always have to make sure we're setting the bar high here. This is how you train fleas not to jump very high.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
Thank you very much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the day. Thank you.